Hey everyone, my name is Brianna Conroy, and I'm going to be presenting today on the professional development book called Teaching as a Subversive Activity by Neil Postman and Charles Weingartner. So, a little bit about me first, the webinar author. I'm currently a graduate student at NC State University in the Masters of Arts and Teaching program in English as a Second Language. All right, let's get started. The webinar is going to explain a little bit of the history and controversies behind this book, as well as the main points in summary. I want to first start with the book's cover and the subtitle that gives the audience a sense of what the book is going to be about or the central premise. So I kind of zoomed in because you couldn't really see it. It says, a no-holds-barred assault on outdated teaching methods with dramatic and practical proposals on how education can be made relevant to today's world. So I quickly want you to pay attention to the author's word choice in using assault as an explanation for this book. It kind of braces the reader for the radical comments and suggestions that they're about to read. When I first read the introduction, I was a little hesitant, so I did some prior research before selecting it to create my webinar. And because it was written in 1969, I wanted to make sure it was still relevant to today's teaching sphere. In fact, because I'll be teaching in an ESL classroom in the future, and because ESL has taken on such a recent exponential growth in the US, I figured outdated teaching methods were going to be something that I needed to look far past because my particular students were going to need something that has never really been focused on in the American school setting up until the 21st century. So during my research, I found some comments online, just simply from Amazon, that were very much expected. This book is old, and some of the events they refer to are not relevant anymore, like the Vietnam War. But this is also essentially a modern book right up to the last minute. Someone even said that they use this as part of their master's dissertation in education, and another person said that it was probably the only useful thing that's come out of the university-based portion of my teaching course so far. Another reader said it will take courage to read this book, but those who are asking honest questions, what's wrong with the world in which we live? How do we build communication bridges across the generation gap? What do they want from us? These people will squirm in the discovery that the answers are really within themselves. Even more so, someone said, this is one of the very best books on education I've ever read. Although published in 1969, I find myself wishing that everyone everywhere would pick it up and read it. And so with that comment, my goal in this webinar is to introduce you to the book, as well as attempt to convince you to explore and learn from it for yourself just as much as I have. So first I want to cover what the word subversive activity means, more specifically subversive. The dictionary defines it as undermining an established or existing system, especially a legally constituted government or set of beliefs. And in the case of Postman and Weingartner, they are more specifically referring to the system of education, and more particularly, that which is in America. All right, so although the book has lots of really good points and directions, I wanted to choose four of the most basic to kind of create a more centralized theme. And so I chose to revolve my webinar around the inquiry theory, crap detecting, just stick with me on that one, the creation of open systems, and what's worth knowing. So the book very much focuses around this idea of an inquiry theory in which students are allowed to ask questions to center their learning instead of it being teacher-centered. And therefore, like the teacher doesn't lecture, there's no strict syllabus to be following. The curriculum is flexible so the children can direct what their goals are. And the textbooks, which are the authors really argue that are only written by human beings, they shouldn't be worshipped in the classroom because of their frequent outdatedness. And then Postman and Weingartner stress that this is the most efficient way to learn because when the students are given a small push to push themselves, they become interested finally and motivated to learn the material, and it's not just assignment after assignment of something that is seen as a negative force against them. Okay, so moving on to crap detecting, and I'm not making this up. It's actually quoted in the book as crap detecting. Postman and Weingartner define crap detecting as determining what information is considered crap or information that's not valid or worthy of examination. The authors quote Hemingway, so I'm going to also. When Hemingway was asked if there was any one essential ingredient that could be identified in a great writer, he replied, "Yes, there is. In order to be a great writer, a person must have a built-in shock-proof crap detector." I think Hemingway had it right in the writing sphere, as well as that of the educational one, and that students shouldn't be taught to believe everything they believe, or they shouldn't be taught to believe everything that they're taught. Excuse me. They should be taught to filter the right from the wrong and inquire about their own beliefs and which of that they are taught they believe in, and if the sources are trustworthy enough for them to introduce those ideas into their own belief systems. So moving on to open systems. Inevitably, in our world, we have closed and open systems, which could be positive and both negative at the same time. But the authors argue that closed problems only have black and white answers, as the name implies. And they go on to explain how these closed problems are treacherous for students because they don't leave room for flexibility or any type of outside thought. And the questions in the upcoming slides, as you'll soon see, are open system questions that allow for this ever-changing environment that we are ultimately teaching our students to become a part of. So when I was reading reviews at first, all I kept seeing were things about page 61, page 61. So when I finally got there, I kind of understood a little bit more why it was so important. And it's because page 61 is completely blank. There's nothing on it, intentionally in the middle of the book, like not even in between chapters, just right in the middle of the book. And the authors actually left it open on purpose for the readers and mainly educators to construct their own curriculum strictly based on questions. And so that's like what they allowed the readers to do. And then after the blank page, they kind of construct their own set of questions for readers to ponder, kind of think about. Some of them included, what are the causes of your worries? Can any of your worries be eliminated? How? What bothers you most about adults? Why? How can you tell good guys from bad guys? How can good be distinguished from evil? What is progress? What other languages does man have besides those consisting of words? What's worth knowing? How do you decide? What are the greatest threats to all forms of life, to plants, to animals, to humans? So those are just some of the questions that they highlighted to be part of their curriculum to ask the students these types of questions. So now I ask you, what is the common factor in all of these questions? Because this is what the book focuses on in question forming, is that for one, they're all divergent or open-ended, and they force the learner to narrow their focus. And authors say that part of the process of learning how to learn is the rephrasing, refining, and dividing of a worth-knowing question into a series of answerable, worth-knowing questions. And so the discussion kind of goes on to demonstrate a classroom asking each other these worth-knowing questions simply based on a single one asked from the teacher. And that no curriculum is telling them where to go, just simply a question and the student's desire to truly know. And it has the entire dialogue of the class and how all the students kind of participate in this one discussion that kind of evolves into more and more knowledge. So after finishing the book, I had to reconsider where I was to go from here with this new knowledge. And luckily, Postman and Weingartner laid out a pretty structured advice column on this with their chapter called So What Do You Do Now? And the 11 points they advised were listed here. There's 5 here and then 6 on the next slide. So I kind of let you guys read over those while I talk about like 2 of the recommendations that I most definitely foresee myself using in my own teaching. And those ones are avoid telling your students any answers and include questions about the future in your classroom. So by not telling students answers, it kind of allows them to push themselves and each other to figure out something. And also by not directly telling them, they are not shut out from being courageous enough to state their own opinion. because as we've learned, children are meaning makers and can redefine opinions based on what they know and their experiences. And the authors also talk about that in the book. And then the second one, in talking about the future in the classroom, especially that of this generation that we expect to be world changers. But the questions that come up in the class about the future kind of motivate that creativity. And even with young children, the authors say that the idea of future shock can be eliminated by the time their future becomes their present. So by graduation or by the time they enter the real world. And so for me, what I gathered from overviews of the book was that the topics that the writers wrote about in 1969 are unfortunately still problems today in our school system. My question for other educators and you is like, when are we going to be able to kick these old habits? And education, as I now see it, doesn't have to be traditional. And most of the time, traditionalist views don't always mean the most effective ones. So as master's students, we really do have the power to change the way we educate and the way we shape the system that we are going to be in control of one day. So with that, I strongly encourage you to find courage in reading this book and consider how we don't have to be just outdated teachers again, but ones that do not fear dramatic change in our classrooms nor our profession in general. So I want to leave you with one last thought. In fact, one last quote from the book. It says, the standard reply to any comment about change, for example, from many educators is that change isn't new and that it is easy to exaggerate its meaning. To such relies, Norbert Wiener had a useful answer. The difference between a fatal and a therapeutic dose of strychnine is only a matter of degree. In other words, change isn't new. What is new is the degree of change, and change changes. And with that, that is the end of my webinar. Thank you, everybody, for listening.